Russian tank going on the attack. But this happens. Now he's an easy target. It turns out, the Ukrainian tank has been waiting for the perfect opportunity all along. There it is. The Ukrainians leave the enemy not a single chance. The Russian tank has been destroyed. But the Russians are trying to get revenge. ATGM missile hits the ground. It's clearly visible in slow motion. Mission accomplished. Time to retreat. Another missile is fired at the Ukrainians. It misses again. It hits a tree. This is how it flies in slow motion. The Russians miss a third time. Ukrainian tank retreats. And here's the pattern of shots fired at the AFU tank. Now take a look at the perfect ambush. 2 Ukrainian tanks covered by a forest belt, waiting for a convenient moment to attack the enemy. Here they are. Behind the trees, 3 Russian tanks are advancing. They don't realize what is happening. First strike. The second one. Third shot, and the enemy tank bursts into flames. Only one of them survived and ran away from the battlefield. And here an AFU tank met the column all alone. He meets the enemy with a powerful shot. With the first hit, it eliminates a daring Russian APC. But the Russians move on. The Ukrainians eliminate another APC. The third shot deprives the Russians of the desire to attack further. The assault has failed. Will this armored group be able to complete their attack? I'm not sure. A Ukrainian tank is already facing them. Each shot is precise and reaches the target. When the task is completed, the Ukrainian tank releases smoke screens and retreats. The Russian tanks explode. And now, see what the hits look like from a different angle. The attack is over, but that's not the end. The Russians sent their tank to attack the positions of the Ukrainian armed forces. The Ukrainians noticed this and decided to respond. When the Ukrainian Leopard arrives at the positions, it attacks the enemy. A precise shot. The damaged Russian tank tries to escape, and unfortunately for the Ukrainians, they have succeeded. And this is a most unexpected encounter. There are only 20 meters between these tanks. The Ukrainian tank fires a shot and hits the enemy. With this shot, he destroys the Russian tank. This is what it looks like from a different angle. This is the Russian tank. The Ukrainians are firing a final shot. Task accomplished. They are safe to retreat. There's a surprise ahead for these Russian tanks. That's a Ukrainian tank. The Russians are getting closer and closer. The Ukrainian tank is attacking. There's a hit. Enemy tanks are engulfed in flames. Another duel. Ukrainian tank rides towards the enemy. That's a Russian tank. After the first hit, the tank bursts into flames. Ukrainians attack again. The camera zooms in, and we see that the target is on fire. And a final shot. Now I want to show you a legendary moment, but it won't be the only one. This is the Ukrainian Leopard. He went out all alone on a mission to clear this forest belt. The drone transmits information where the enemy is, and the Leopard instantly destroys the targets. Then, he drives in closer and shoots up the positions. As Leopard retreats, he spots several armored targets. Here's the first target. One shot and the APC is significantly damaged. We can see the destruction from different angles. And here's the second target. They're trying to escape. A shot in the rear and the fire will do the rest. The next day, the Russians arrived in a large column. They have no idea this Leopard is this crazy. One by one, the APCs explode under Ukrainian tank shelling. They had no chance. That's how the Russian column lost the battle to just one Ukrainian tank. Here's another legendary moment. A huge column of Russian armored vehicles is attacking. There are tanks and APCs. There are at least a dozen of them. Ukrainian artillery is trying to stop the column, but they are advancing further. Ukrainian tankers advance on this dangerous task. The tank is taking up position. Pay attention to how smartly the Ukrainian armed forces are operating. The tank takes cover behind this building, and at the same time, controls this sector. First shot misses. Reload and fire again. It's an excellent shot. The column ignores the tank. The damaged APC is engulfed in flames. Russians still don't understand where they're being fired from? This APC is ignoring the threat and firing in an unknown direction. As soon as it moves out under the tank's line of fire, it notices the AFU tank and opens fire. The tank responds with a shot. It's a miss, but finally, he manages to hit one of the Russian tanks. Under shelling, the Russian column keeps driving on. Some of the armored vehicles are destroyed. Put your thumb up if you think the actions of Ukrainian tank crew are heroic. And these are some of my favorite moments. This is a Ukrainian tank. It was sent to repel a Russian attack. And this is a Russian tank. It spots the enemy in advance and attacks them. It misses. Ukrainians must do something about it immediately. Second shot. There's something wrong with the Russians' marksmanship, but it's getting scarier anyway. The Ukrainian tank responds. In this footage, you can even see a Ukrainian shell hitting a Russian tank. The enemy is destroyed. The AFU tank goes to set up a trap. For unknown reasons, the Russians ignore the threat. The turret is turned the other way. Maybe something distracted them. The Ukrainians close in on the tank. The hit is enough to destroy the enemy tank. After such a shot, the tank loses control and suddenly ignites. Look at it again. Nice work. And here's a similar moment. This is what happens when the enemy captures your armored vehicles. In this video, Ukrainians on a captured Russian tank meet a Russian APC. They let it drive up as close as possible. One hit is enough to immobilize the armored personnel carrier. After that, the Ukrainians finish off the Russian junk. The Russian APC made a deadly mistake. It stopped. The Ukrainian tank takes advantage of this misstep. With a perfect strike, the Ukrainian tank destroys it. The camera fades out and we see an AFU tank. Mission accomplished. Now they can safely retreat. And I won't let you forget about this ambush. Those Russian paratroopers quickly realized they were in trouble. The Ukrainian Bradley took them in his sights and launched a missile. But he missed. The APC is rushing to the settlement to land the Marines as soon as possible. If they succeed, the Russians will have a chance to gain a foothold. The soldiers quickly dismount from the armored vehicles. The APC turns around and leaves. FPV drone is in pursuit. After the first hit, the APC stops. The second drone takes it out. That's all that's left of the armored personnel carrier. Bradley reacts and arrives at the settlement to dislodge the enemy. Bradley starts firing his automatic cannon. The Russian plan fails. A column of Russian vehicles advances for an assault, oblivious to the fact that a Ukrainian Leopard tank is quietly and methodically observing them, like a true predator. As the column moves within range, the tank locks onto its target and opens precise fire. After several devastating strikes, the vehicles attempt to turn around to retreat. But look closely, they make a fatal mistake. By exposing their side armor, they become an even easier target. A single tank annihilates the majority of the enemy vehicles, halting a massive mechanized offensive in its tracks. After a series of devastating strikes, you can see the crews abandoning their vehicles and fleeing. The advance has been halted, and the destroyed vehicles are engulfed in flames. Yet, on the horizon, two more Russian armored vehicles emerge, attempting to break through past the Leopard. The Ukrainian tank swiftly charges onto the battlefield, decisively engaging and destroying the Russian armor. With pinpoint accuracy, the Leopard leaves no chance for the enemy vehicles, reducing them to smoldering heaps of scrap metal. The result of skilled work. Yet another failed Russian assault attempt. The crew taming and commanding this beast definitely deserves a like. If the Leopard is the beast among tanks, then mines can be considered the hedgehogs on the battlefield, with their spikes tearing apart Russian armor, as seen in the following case when a Russian IFV moves along one of the so-called roads of death. Look, several pieces of equipment have already been destroyed here, and this sector is under full fire control of the Ukrainian forces. But this does not stop the armored vehicle. It hits a mine. By inertia, the vehicle veers off to the roadside. One of the crew members abandons the vehicle and takes cover under the previously destroyed equipment. Almost immediately, the last gift from the Ukrainian forces heads straight for him. And this is far from the candy he could have enjoyed, had he not come to fight on foreign soil. Kursk. Russian military vehicles in small groups attempt to attack Ukrainian positions. However, this was an expected move. The vehicles begin to hit preset landmines. The first vehicle explodes, and the second tries to bypass it but also hits a mine. Nearby, another vehicle, loaded with ammunition, explodes. But it's impossible to mine all the paths, so drones are brought into the fight. While drones are destroying the equipment, a team with an anti-tank missile system begins firing from an ambush.
Внимание к бою!
Wheeled armored vehicles attempt to leave the battlefield, realizing that the attack has failed and their available forces are no longer sufficient. The drones prevent them from escaping and destroy the vehicles one by one. a column of heavy Russian equipment advances into an attack. Leading the formation is a massive turtle tank, clearing the path ahead, while maneuverable yet well-protected vehicles equipped with anti-drone grills provide cover from the rear. This has become a familiar tactic for them. A drone armed with a shaped charge flies toward its target. But watch closely. It calmly bypasses the tank and heads straight for a more vulnerable, lightly armored infantry vehicle positioned in the middle of the column. The first strike deals critical damage to the vehicle. Subsequent drones, though unable to completely halt the convoy, cause its crews to panic. Next, the mines set in place come into play. This intersection is fully mined, so the vehicles moving nearby are destined to meet the same fate. The drone strikes an IFV, forcing it off the road and bringing it to a halt. A subsequent drone hit ignites the IFV, turning it into a blazing torch. Look closely. The vehicle keeps moving and runs over a mine. The drone heads toward the destruction of the turtle tank. Look, the added armor increased the tank's weight and size, causing it to get stuck in what seemed like a simple obstacle for a tank. The detonation of the ammunition leaves no trace of the tank. This multiple launch rocket system, after being hit by the drone, began to detonate its munitions chaotically. Another destruction of a BM-21 Grad multiple rocket launcher, this time during a combat mission. The launcher still had shells on board and began repositioning, but the drone didn't allow it to do so. In the Kursk region, Russian forces attempted to regain their positions using IFVs with infantry. 5 soldiers disembarked and engaged in a firefight as they advanced toward the tree line. The vehicles began retreating, and almost immediately, Ukrainian forces struck them with a Javelin missile. Eventually, the assault group was eliminated, and the destroyed vehicles were left burning nearby. A remarkable 22 units of armored vehicles were involved in this assault, moving in groups of 4 at a certain distance from each other. Kamikaze drones began targeting them. After a series of strikes, the vehicles were forced to stop, just as planned. Then, from an ambush, the Stagna anti-tank guided missile system begins to deliver the final blows. Drones and missile systems are operating at full speed, but there is so much equipment and it continues to advance. Fortunately, the effective minefields help avoid catastrophe. Realizing that the assault has failed, the Russians begin to retreat. However, Ukrainian forces continue their work, destroying the equipment one after another. The massive turtle tanks managed to flee further, but were still destroyed. Russians on armored vehicles, firing as they advance, break into a village in Donetsk region. Drone operators positioned in the basements of destroyed buildings immediately begin attacking the vehicles with kamikaze drones. The immobilized and burning vehicles are abandoned by the Russians, who flee in an attempt to hide among the ruins of the buildings. Some vehicles manage to push deeper into the village, but are eventually struck by a drone, forcing them to stop. You can see about 10 soldiers scattering across the area. Based on coordinates provided by a reconnaissance drone, kamikaze drones are launched to target the approximate positions of the Russian troops. Donetsk region. Russian positions with equipment have been detected. Artillery begins its work, delivering precise strikes. Tanks positioned in the bushes near power lines were also hit by 155mm shells. All this equipment was waiting for the right moment to attempt to cut off the Ukrainian supply route. However, thanks to reconnaissance and precise artillery work, that plan is unlikely to succeed. After another failed assault, the rest of the work in destroying the equipment is carried out by relatively inexpensive yet extremely effective drones. Since the Russians were on a combat mission, the vehicles were loaded with ammunition, ensuring spectacular explosions. Now, I'm going to show you something unique. This is the legendary Bukhanka and its adventures in Ukraine. The Russians thought they had this car safely hidden, but it turns out to be the exact opposite. The drone begins its bombardment. Shrapnel is guaranteed to damage the car. Suddenly, the Ukrainians notice this suspicious pileup. Underneath the camouflage netting is fuel. Here are 2 more canisters. The drone drops a grenade that explodes and damages them. Fuel is slowly leaking out of the canisters. But that's not all. Time to set fire to the spilled fuel. At some point, the vehicle comes to life. The headlights come on, and it starts to drive forward. It's magic. The Ghost Rider is slowly burning to the ground. No one will ride it anymore, although Russians know how to surprise. Russian soldiers set up their base here. We see 4 targets at once. The Ukrainians sent FPV drones to eliminate their vehicles. When the second drone arrived, the first cars were engulfed in flames. Nice work. The hunt continues. The truck is unaware of anything and moves down the road. An FPV drone is already following the truck. The Russians are transporting explosives hidden by branches. Yeah, it was explosives. A precise strike, and the car shatters into hundreds of small pieces. Nice work. Park this trough in a very symbolic place, near a grave. 1 drone hits and the Bukhanka turns into burning garbage. Don't hide it. Ukrainians will find it anyway. Just like in this case. An FPV drone attacks the target. The car is torched. Those Russians were emotionally discussing something. As soon as they left the scene, the Bukhanka suffered a miracle. We see the Ukrainian drone attack from 2 angles. The drone attacked and destroyed it. Let's keep burning Russian trucks. It took too long for it to turn around. The truck's still on the move. Apparently, the drone hit the fuel tank. The car is shaking from side to side, but it's still moving. And it even managed to reach its destination. But it was already obvious that this was the truck's last trip. But nice try, orcs. The flames have spread to the back of the truck. The target is destroyed. What's this truck carrying? It can't escape an attack drone. check this out. It's not a homemade FPV drone. It's landing on the truck. The AFU used an expensive drone for this, so the truck was carrying something important. The truck is destroyed. The Russians brought ammunition to their positions. The Ukrainians are watching closely. FPV drone dives into the target. Beautiful destruction. Take another look at it. Another ugly one. It's located right here. The drone attacks it. The hilarious thing is, the vehicle starts to move forward. He drives a few meters and stops. Powerful flames destroy it. Turns out there's another target nearby. The Ukrainians discovered the location of the Russian military and attacked it. Eventually, even managed to burn down their hideout. You'd be surprised, but there's another ugly Russian car here. But the Ukrainians detect and attack it. Boom! After the hit, the Russians decide to move the still functional car. Did they really think they could do it without getting caught in the lens of the Ukrainian drone? That's a fatal mistake. The drone finishes off the old Russian junk. This is what it looks like after impact, a piece of useless metal. Another highlight. 2 targets have been identified. FPV drone heading for the target. We got a hit. The first target is on fire. There's a second hit. Mission accomplished. This is the result the frustrated enemy showed later. Now I want to show you these moments. This ride is the last one for the RV. An FPV drone is attacking him. There's another one. One more Bukanka is destroyed. The 2 vehicles were returning from a combat mission when they were stopped by an FPV drone. At first, the Ukrainians intercepted this target. Seems like it didn't take any damage at all. Subsequently, it was destroyed by fire. Here comes the second vehicle. A Ukrainian drone delivers a precise strike. Annihilated. The hunt for Bukankas doesn't stop. They can't avoid being hit in any way and are being destroyed one by one. Further on, I have something interesting for you. Look what happened to this one after the hit. This Bukanka was transporting weapons for Russian soldiers. But a Ukrainian drone interfered with that. The Russians abandoned this vehicle for nothing. The Ukrainian drone flies inside and explodes. The fire leaves no chance. This vehicle is stuck in the mud and abandoned. The drone dives exactly into it. It's been in the mud, gonna burn with a blazing fire. It's a Russian Gazelle. The Ukrainians followed the Russians and attacked the truck. A precise frontal attack destroys the vehicle. The Ukrainians are vigilantly watching this Russian SUV. It drives up to the building and stops. Immediately, it's being attacked by a Ukrainian drone. The target is eliminated, and this Niva is attacked by a drone while it's moving. This truck is carrying ammunition, and the Ukrainians' job is to stop it. After the drone strikes, the truck bursts into flames. The Russian vehicle was on its way to a very important meeting. The Ukrainians were watching it closely, and they launched a drone. It crashed right into the front of the car and destroyed it. Another truck loaded with ammunition. Drones closing in fast. The camouflage didn't help, and the wounded truck stops. The truck is bursting into flames. There's a lot of explosives in this vehicle. One attack wasn't enough. The second drone catches up with it. A huge column of smoke can be seen from far away. This truck was immobilized and abandoned by the Russians. The Ukrainians didn't miss the opportunity to destroy it. Successful attack. The truck is on fire, and this is an interception during an important delivery. After the drone attack, the truck drives off into the field. A second drone is on its way. Perfect hit on the fuel tank. Target is destroyed. Now let's see the Ukrainians disrupt this enemy operation. The truck clearly didn't come here for nothing. Drone hits the target. Heavy flames engulf the vehicle. Target detonates. The operation has been thwarted. The fate of this truck is clear. After the drone attack, it drives a little further and stops. The second drone is close. It's attacking the stopped truck. The enemy has just recently unloaded from this SUV. The Ukrainians are attacking it to deny the enemy the opportunity to leave. The enemy's chances of leaving this area have been drastically reduced. This SUV was actually an easy target. Exactly on target. The truck is covered in flames. The Russians have finally decided to use North Korean soldiers in the war against Ukraine. We have video evidence proving that these are indeed Korean soldiers.
Ну. Маску, пусть оденут, да и все. Да? Маску оденут. И кто все равно то знает, да.
Russian commanders sent them into an assault to capture Ukrainian positions. Look. North Korean soldiers are running across the field without cover or any armored vehicles. It resembled a scene from World War I. Clearly, the Russian command has absolutely no regard for the Koreans. The Russians did not provide them with any armored vehicles. Perhaps this is because the Koreans are not trained to operate them, and the Russians have neither the time nor the desire to train them. Moreover, the Koreans have no experience in modern warfare. They don't know what drones are or how to act under such circumstances. The Russian army had time to at least partially adapt to this, whereas the Korean soldiers never even had internet access to learn about the current realities. Ukrainian units deployed a large number of drones against the Korean soldiers, as well as conducted targeted artillery fire and used cluster munitions. This quickly disorganized their attack, and in panic, they didn't know what to do. It was evident that they were poorly prepared and utterly confused. They started scattering in different directions, hiding in bushes and among trees. Some of them tried to regroup, but it didn't help them. Ukrainian drones quickly scattered them, and they fled like mice, while the Koreans were hiding and trying to avoid encounters with Ukrainian FPV drones. Reconnaissance drones clearly captured their faces on camera, confirming that they were indeed Koreans. Their eyes revealed that they were terrified. Some Koreans turned out to be more cunning and began digging trenches to hide, but the frozen ground allowed them to dig only shallow shelters. This, too, did not help them. Some of them tried to flee from the drones, while others even attempted to shoot them down. However, this did not lead to any significant success. The most elite soldiers managed to establish a position on the opposite side of the field, but the Ukrainians sent a tank against them. The Ukrainian T-80 tank quickly located their position and began delivering strike after strike until they were completely destroyed. Later, videos from a Russian hospital appeared online, showing injured Korean soldiers. This is further evidence that Russia is indeed using them in the war against Ukraine, although it officially denies it. And although the Russian forces are currently using Korean troops very sparingly, they continue to launch full-scale assaults on other parts of the front. To avoid falling into a trap, they split into several smaller groups. Two enemy APCs decided that the safest option would be to try breaking through this field, but they immediately came under heavy fire from Ukrainian artillery. The first shot hit one of the armored vehicles directly, completely destroying it. Its counterpart was slightly luckier. It managed to avoid the shelling, so it sped up, maneuvering around the shattered remains of its companion, hoping to reach a safe location. However, the Ukrainian army is equipped not only with artillery, but also with more precise means of destruction. This time, only one kamikaze drone was needed, which the operator skillfully guided into the most vulnerable spot of the armored vehicle, and the crew of this tank decided it would be safer to bypass the road, fearing it might be mined. However, the Ukrainian sappers proved to be even more cunning. Its companion managed to avoid the mines but couldn't escape a precise javelin strike. Most of the equipment in this assault was destroyed by one of the legendary Ukrainian drone operator units, Magyar Birds, who have repeatedly demonstrated their courage and cunning, and we will show you exactly how. Over the years of practice, the pilots of this team have learned not only to fly skillfully, but also to hit the most vulnerable spots of enemy equipment with maximum precision. For example, in this case, the drone flew straight into the open hatch of a Russian APC and even continued transmitting video. At first, it seems that the mission has failed and the detonation didn't work. But after a few seconds, we see that everything went exactly as planned. Even when the Russians leave the hatch open, flying an FPV drone inside an APC or tank is extremely difficult. However, this method allows for the most effective destruction of Russian military equipment, but this is only possible if the vehicle is already immobilized. When the armored vehicle is moving and maneuvering, the drone pilot becomes a true hunter, stalking their prey. The Russian APC leaves the road and tries to maneuver to avoid the drone attack. The first strike damaged the vehicle but didn't stop it. The Russians continued their offensive, but at one point it seemed that panic took over, and they immediately changed their course, hoping to escape the battlefield without even attempting to deploy their troops. They turned back onto the same road they had just come from and began fleeing quickly. But by this time, another FPV drone pilot had taken over, having closed the distance and was now in range for an attack. The second explosion caused even more damage, and we can see smoke starting to rise from inside the armored vehicle. Such damage was no longer something the Russian crew could ignore, and they made the only right decision: to evacuate and abandon the vehicle. They quickly scattered in different directions, realizing that where two drones had hit, there was a high likelihood that a third would soon follow. And they were right. The third kamikaze drone completely destroyed the APC, and we see the flames engulfing its body. But even after all the losses that occurred at the beginning of this assault, the Russians don't stop and continue sending additional reinforcements, one after another, to the same positions. Well, the Ukrainians definitely have more drones than the Russians have armored vehicles, and they are using this to their advantage. Another APC is lost forever, and once again, the team of Russian assault troops flees in panic back to where they came from. This time, however, not everyone managed to survive. The hardest hit were those Russians who weren't inside the vehicle but were sitting on top of the armor, hoping that luck would be on their side. But did this stop the advance? Not at all. A Russian tank quickly moves to assist the destroyed APCs, but this time it was not a drone or artillery that stopped it, but a remote-controlled mine. A reconnaissance drone spots another unit of Russian equipment moving towards the recently destroyed tank. This time, it's a light vehicle with almost no protection, making it an even more vulnerable target. Do the Russians not value the lives of their soldiers, sending them to storm in regular cars? Following the car, the newest Russian armored vehicle, Akhmat, joins the assault. But is it really as durable as Russian propaganda claimed on their TV channels? Due to sanctions, many compromises had to be made in the production of this equipment, and the result can be seen in this video. Just one precise hit from a kamikaze drone, and although the vehicle continued to move for a while, we soon see the end of its journey. While the latest Russian equipment burns alongside its counterparts, Ukrainians continue to deploy drones to finish off what remains. The first armored vehicle had not yet finished burning when another one headed down the same road. It seems the Russians were ordered to continue the offensive at all costs. Cautiously bypassing the destroyed equipment, they moved toward the spot where a tank had recently been blown up by a mine. However, they didn't know that, in the meantime, Ukrainians had conducted another round of remote mining using the Baba Yaga drone. And as it turned out, this was a very good decision. Another armored vehicle has been successfully neutralized, and yet another group of Russians is frantically searching for cover from the deadly Ukrainian drones. But what do you think happened next? That's right. The Russians sent yet another armored vehicle to the exact same location, following the exact same route. And as soon as the crew got closer, they fell into the same trap as their comrades. Give a like to the ingenuity of the Ukrainian forces, who managed to lure so much enemy equipment into an ambush on such a small section of the front line. Because the Russians mindlessly attempted to attack this position head-on. In this short episode alone, they lost more than 24 pieces of various equipment and even more soldiers' lives. We cannot say for certain what their plan was, but it definitely did not include a graveyard of burning Russian equipment. The remnants of the column that didn't fall into this ambush weren't in for anything good either. This APC was stopped with the first hit. After the crew fled, Ukrainian pilots once again did what they do best, finished off the vehicle from the inside. Another enemy group left their tank in a forest near Ukrainian positions. Perhaps they hoped that the camouflage would help hide it, and the branches would prevent drones from getting closer. But as we can see, the FPV drone operator skillfully avoided all obstacles and delivered a powerful strike. Then, his colleague also decided to join in. That day, the Magyar Birds unit had to work at a very intense pace, but the results were impressive. Such a large amount of destroyed Russian equipment in such a short period of time is not something you see every day. And considering that destroying one tank or APC often requires using 2 or 3 drones, just imagine how many flights Ukrainian soldiers made that day. We've already mentioned that the Russians lack military equipment, and another piece of evidence of this is the following video. The Ukrainian kamikaze drone hit the armored personnel carrier at the moment when it was trying to evacuate from the battlefield its damaged tank. It didn't stop after the first explosion and continued towing its armored companion. Only after another hit did the crew start fleeing, realizing that instead of saving another piece of equipment, they had now lost 2. Perhaps the shortage of equipment can explain this strange episode that was captured on video. The soldiers inexplicably decided to place the Russian flag on a destroyed Ukrainian armored vehicle, proudly displaying it as if they had captured a pile of scrap metal. One could assume they were simply celebrating its destruction, but why put the Russian flag on it? Perhaps we will never understand the logic behind some of their actions. A few days later, another Russian convoy tried to launch an offensive on Ukrainian positions. But this time they were met not by a swarm of drones, but by a very heavy artillery fire. In just a few accurate salvos, the Ukrainians managed to destroy 4 out of the 5 units of equipment involved in the attack. Then, another shell hit the last APC, which was desperately trying to escape its fate. And after that, drone pilots joined the defense as well, ultimately turning the formidable military equipment of the occupiers into heaps of scrap metal. And this time, we can also observe how the Russians do not care for or value their soldiers, sending them on futile assaults and attempting to seize another piece of territory by relying solely on the number of lives sacrificed in battle. Only the Russian soldiers themselves care about their lives, as in this case. When realizing the drone's approach, they decided to abandon the vehicle on the move to avoid becoming victims of the kamikaze strike. But the statistics are not on the enemy's side. Even when they manage to survive an unsuccessful assault and find shelter near the attack site, they are most likely to be destroyed by the same kamikaze drones or Dragon drones, which were specifically designed to eliminate enemies in hard-to-reach locations. In today's episode, you will see how Ukrainians repel the advance of Russian tank columns. So, let's begin. In this footage, you can see Russian forces advancing on tanks and armored vehicles towards Ukrainian positions. They intend to seize another populated area. However, Ukrainian defenders have prepared a surprise for them. The FPV drone equipped with a shaped charge warhead can detonate any Russian tank with a single strike. Take a look at this abandoned Russian T-80 tank. The drone hits it at the base of the turret and you can see the result for yourself. And the Russians know this, so they advance cautiously. Ukrainians allow them to pass through the gray zone and approach closer. Then, they simultaneously launch all prepared drones and begin to target the Russian armor, until not a single tank or APC remains intact. Thus, the Russian attack has faltered. From a technical standpoint, penetrating the Ukrainian defense is nearly impossible, but the Russians achieve some success due to their significantly larger infantry and armored vehicle numbers. Russian tank crews scatter but come under fire from cluster munitions. But even if the Russians manage to advance by 100 meters somewhere, they pay an incredibly high price for this progress. In this video, you can see another failed Russian attack near Avdiivka. They abandoned their equipment and fled. After that, the Ukrainians only had to finish the job and burn the Russian armored vehicles, which they successfully did. More than 7 tanks and APCs, totaling $12 million, were lost by the Russians in one attack. Meanwhile, Ukrainians, to repel this attack, used only FPV drones. But what looks even stranger is the scattered Russian soldiers trying to survive in an uneven competition with Ukrainian drones. The Ukrainian drone dropped a note to the Russian soldier, but he was afraid and discarded it. After a few minutes, the Russian soldier finally unfolded the note and read it. The note said, "If you want to live, follow the drone and you will be saved." The Russian soldier agreed and followed the drone, saving his life. Guys, let's give a like to the Ukrainians for their humane attitude towards the enemy. After capturing Avdiivka, the Russians continued to advance on some sections of the front. In this video, a column of Russian armored vehicles attacks at night but encounters serious resistance. Ukrainian defenders destroy one tank after another. In the morning, we saw the wreckage of Russian armored vehicles. The attack failed. Over the past week, Ukrainians have managed to repel over 10 major attacks near the city of Mariinka, and after each attack, the Russians lose dozens of tanks and armored vehicles. Before your eyes are two abandoned Russian T-72 tanks. The first drone ignites one tank, while the second leads to a large explosion. Another tank attack failed. In the same location, a few days later, the Russians lost another entire column of armored vehicles. In this video, you can see how Ukrainians destroy abandoned APCs. Ukrainian forces are doing everything to make each meter of progress too costly for the Russians. I want to show you an interesting example of how an FPV drone helps in a crucial moment. About a month ago, the Russians attempted to capture a fortified Ukrainian position near Bakhmut. A Russian armored vehicle approached the Ukrainians closely and opened machine gun fire on them. The Russians were very close and ready to disembark to capture the Ukrainian bunker. But the Ukrainians launched a drone from the bunker and hit the Russian APC from behind. Inside the APC were at least 7 Russian assault troops. That's how just one drone stopped the Russians and saved the Ukrainian location. But that's not all. Not far from there was another Russian tank that was supposed to provide support. Seeing that the attack failed, the tank began to retreat, but it was caught up by the Ukrainian drone. All this means that 10 Russian soldiers, armed with a tank and APC, with plenty of ammunition inside, were unable to capture the Ukrainian bunker because of 2 FPV drones. Here's another example of how a massive tank attack was repelled solely by FPV drones. In January of this year, the Russians attacked Avdiivka from different directions. The Russians deployed dozens of tanks and armored vehicles, but the Ukrainians were prepared for this attack and had stocked up on a sufficient number of FPV drones. To repel a large-scale attack, it's crucial to have various combinations of mini drones, but most importantly, to have at least a few drones equipped with shaped charge warheads. This is necessary to explode at least a few tanks and intimidate the Russians. Then they are more likely to abandon their armored vehicles and flee. The sight of a blown-up tank on the battlefield really sends shivers down the spine. So the Russians abandon their tanks and flee, unwilling to be caught in a burning tank. In that case, Ukrainians can save on FPV drones. After all, abandoned tanks can be set on fire in a simpler way, by tossing a grenade into the hatch, and that is usually sufficient. So, when the Russians attack, the main goal is to blow up one or several of their tanks. Then, they start to panic and scatter, abandoning their armored vehicles on the battlefield. After that, this armor can be destroyed using cheaper FPV drones or by throwing grenades. The drones hover over the battlefield like wasps and destroy one tank after another until they burn them all down. This is what modern warfare looks like. Later, Ukrainians found 2 more brand new Russian tanks abandoned by the Russians out of fear. A drone ignited one of the tanks, causing it to burn like a torch, so that the Russians could see from a distance that their attack had failed. Here's another example of how a drone equipped with a regular grenade can outmatch a tank. This Russian tank attacked a Ukrainian bunker and received a drone strike directly into the tank's engine compartment. As a result, the tank became immobilized. The Russians fired 2 more shots, after which they had to abandon the tank and flee. course, later, the Ukrainians set fire to the abandoned tank. And finally, I want to show you another Russian attack that was thwarted solely by drones. This took place near Avdiivka in January of this year. The Russians behaved strangely and disorganized right from the start of the attack. They themselves damaged one of their tanks without an obvious reason. But when they entered the gray zone and began to approach the Ukrainian positions, a swarm of Ukrainian drones simply started destroying them one by one. The Ukrainians managed to reach and strike with a drone even the tank that the Russians had damaged before the battle. About half an hour later, all the Russian tanks were knocked out and ablaze. The battlefield was shrouded in smoke. Most Russians fled without engaging in combat, and all their armored vehicles were destroyed by drones. In this battle, the Ukrainians did not use a single artillery shell. In order to use drones in this way, Ukrainian soldiers need well-protected bunkers where they can take cover and command the battle. So my friends, if you've watched up to this point, please leave a like on this video as a sign that my efforts in collecting the best moments of the Russian-Ukrainian war are not in vain. Thank you for your support, and I'll see you in the next episodes. The Russians have launched an offensive operation on the Eastern Front to encircle the Ukrainian city of Avdiivka. They've assembled several assault groups comprising armored vehicles. Tanks led the way, firing at Ukrainian defensive positions. However, the Ukrainians were prepared to repel the attack. See what happened next. The first Russian T-90 tank pushed forward to suppress the Ukrainian strongpoint. It managed to fire a few shots, but the Ukrainians struck it and destroyed it. Take a closer look at this incident. The commander of the Russian tank extended himself from the hatch and tried to direct the battle. This is not the right way to go about it. The crew fired one shot, then another, but literally seconds later, the tank exploded and turned into scrap metal. It's not clear whether the tank detonated on a mine or was destroyed by other means, but it's evidence that all the ammunition inside the tank detonated. Another tank was firing at the Ukrainian troops' position, but it was shot down by a drone. The tank caught fire, but this time, the tank driver managed to escape. An armored personnel carrier rushed forward. Watch how accurately an anti-tank missile hit it. We have this video from another angle. The armored personnel carrier ignited, and the Russians began evacuating and fleeing. Some armored personnel carriers fell victim to landmines. Even a tank equipped with a mine-clearing machine and protected by an iron grill against drones was halted and set on fire by Ukrainian forces. Using these kamikaze drones, it's possible to attack tanks even before they reach their combat positions. This tactic confuses the Russians. The drone flies faster than any vehicle can move, making it impossible to escape. Later, all the abandoned armored vehicles were also destroyed using various types of drones. FPV drones and drone bombers dropping grenades directly into tank hatches have been incinerating Russian armored vehicles. In this abandoned armored personnel carrier, the Russians stored ammunition. Using an FPV drone, the Ukrainians turned this vehicle into a massive fireball. The Russians were lucky to escape before the kamikaze mini-drone arrived. The Ukrainian command is directing the battle from a concealed observation point. They have all the means for successful enemy surveillance. The Russian offensive operation was also supported by artillery fire. However, the Ukrainians easily detected the location of Russian artillery with the help of Western technology. A self-propelled Howitzer 2S5 was destroyed by a direct hit from a HIMARS missile. The howitzer managed to fire only one shell. Subsequently, another 2S3 howitzer was also destroyed by a HIMARS missile. all the ammunition exploded along with the howitzer. Another 2S-5 howitzer was also destroyed by a very precise HIMARS missile strike. An old self-propelled mortar called Nona was also destroyed by an FPV drone. It caught fire and soon exploded. A little further, the Russians used self-propelled howitzer 2S-7. This formidable weapon can fire 200mm shells up to a distance of 20 kilometers. The 2S-7 moved into position and was spotted. The Ukrainians launched a kamikaze drone at it, and the howitzer was destroyed. Another Russian howitzer, 2S-19, loaded with ammunition, was supporting the Russian advance. The Ukrainians started hunting it down. A second drone ultimately led to the detonation of all the ammunition, turning the howitzer into a fiery cloud. Nothing remained of the howitzer. Next, the support group was destroyed, trucks and fuel tankers. Additionally, with 2 HIMARS missiles, the Ukrainians destroyed the electronic warfare station, which burned to the ground. During the attack, the Russians attempted to drop heavy 500-kilogram bombs on Ukrainian positions, but the Ukrainians shot down several Russian aircraft. In the end, the Russian offensive faltered. They were defeated. Perhaps the Ukrainians are not as strong in offensive operations as they used to be, as they lack many types of weapons, but they are formidable in defense. Drones dropping grenades have long been causing significant damage to Russian tanks. However, it's FPV drones that have become a highly dangerous weapon in modern warfare. With their help, enemy forces can be thrown into complete disarray. Tanks in open fields are easy targets for such drones, with little chance of survival. Using these drones, Ukrainian soldiers easily deliver explosives right into the hatch of a Russian tank and incinerate it. Even Palestinians use drones against Israeli Merkava. During conflicts, they have managed to destroy several of them. During the Russian attack on Avdiivka, Ukrainians shot down and incinerated numerous pieces of Russian armored vehicles. Everything is captured on video. Ukrainians also targeted trucks carrying ammunition. In this video, we see one of the trucks being hit by an FPV drone and subsequently burning. Against retreating infantry on the battlefield, Ukrainians employed 155mm artillery shells and mortars. Cluster munitions in particular proved to be very painful for the Russians. Ukrainian artillery crows have long mastered the art of shooting accurately and almost always hitting the targets on the first attempt. The work of an artilleryman is a physically demanding job, comparable to working in a mine or at a metallurgical plant. They have to move tons of iron in a day. One shell weighs 50 kilograms, and an artillery crew can fire 200 shells in a day. This means that a person can manually handle 10 tons of iron in a day. It's a Herculean effort. Take a look at this video. Russian drone operators ventured into the field to launch a kamikaze drone at Ukrainian positions, but were detected by Ukrainian intelligence. They are dangerous. In this video, we can see how the Russians managed to strike a Ukrainian Su-25 aircraft. It was located 70 kilometers from the front line, but luck was not on their side. While they were attempting to launch their drone, they were targeted with a HIMARS missile. The missile hit its mark precisely, destroying almost everything, including the operators themselves. Kamikaze drones have had such a profound impact on modern warfare that they have even altered the appearance of armored vehicles. Russians now routinely install grills on all types of armored vehicles, from tanks to artillery units. This provides some protection for armored vehicles against ubiquitous enemy drones. Furthermore, Ukrainian forces are now installing special steel mesh to protect stationary artillery from Russian loitering munitions. Despite the ongoing conflict in the Middle East, the United States and NATO will continue to supply Ukraine with all the necessary weaponry.
So we must continue to step up and sustain the steady flow of weapons and ammunition to Ukraine.
Putin can be certain that he won't be able to occupy Ukraine. Ukraine will definitely join NATO and become a full-fledged part of the Western world. And if you want to see how Ukrainians destroy Russian armored vehicles with Javelin missiles, then watch this video. One shot, one hit. This is the rule when Ukrainian soldiers use the Javelin. In this video, the victim is a Russian tank. Take another look. The drone camera clearly captures the missile in flight. As a result, the destroyed T-72 tank, worth over $500,000, is burning out and detonating in the middle of the road. The Russian assault begins with the involvement of two IFVs. The vehicles move confidently across the open field, fortunate enough not to encounter any anti-tank mines along the way. But their luck was short-lived. Ukrainian forces fire a Javelin. The first IFV is hit. The vehicle following behind keeps moving despite everything. It covers a few more 100 meters. Another missile is launched, hitting the target precisely. Take a look from another angle. Another drone captured this from a closer distance. It's on fire, but keeps moving. An RPG shot is fired, but doesn't cause critical damage. Almost immediately, another Javelin missile strikes the vehicle. After that, a massive swarm of kamikaze drones attacks, completely destroying the equipment. Just look at how one by one, the drones deliver powerful blows to the Russian vehicles. This time, 3 vehicles advanced for the assault. The first one is already destroyed. The others continue to move. Take another look at this accurate shot. Ukrainian forces, from an ambush, fire another Javelin shot. Another direct hit. The vehicle burns for a while before being literally torn apart by the detonation. This tank was also ambushed with a Javelin. The detonation was so powerful that the tank's turret was blown off and thrown several dozen meters into the air. Take a closer look at a similar situation with the T-90M tank. Sometimes the turret is thrown so high that it ends up embedding itself several meters into the ground. Russian soldiers are preparing for a salvo from a fully loaded MLRS. Everything is almost ready, and the vehicle raises its launcher into firing position. The soldiers hear the sound of a drone and scatter in different directions as fast as they can. An explosion of incredible force. Look, the vehicle is practically dissolved into thin air. A barely noticeable black spot is all that remains of the equipment. The destruction of yet another Russian armored group by Ukrainian forces began with the tanks. After the first wave of drone attacks, the Russians halted and abandoned their vehicles. The second wave of drones was sent in to burn them completely. After the tanks were destroyed, the drone operators shifted their focus to finishing off the light armored vehicles. Look at this burning heap of metal. The open hatches and doors of the vehicles, left behind after the Russians' hasty retreat, made the job easier for the kamikaze drones. After a series of strikes, this group of vehicles ceased to exist. This assault was stopped not by drones or javelins, but by a single Ukrainian tank. 2 Russian IFVs were attempting to advance toward Ukrainian positions when, unexpectedly, the tank opened fire on them. The first vehicle is destroyed. The tank begins the chase. The first shot misses, but the second shot, a perfect hit. The turtle tank hits a mine. Then something unexpected happens. A drone armed with thermite drops a hellish shower on the tank. After some time, the tank catches fire, with its ammunition detonating in the process. The high speed of the vehicle does not save it from anti-tank mines. The vehicle catches fire and explodes in an instant. All that remains is a bright fireball. This tank, in the midst of an open field, finds a small island with greenery and takes up a firing position. A drone launched by Ukrainian soldiers flies in behind the vehicle and delivers a precise strike between the turret and the hull of the tank. The pressure from the detonation is so immense that the tank's turret is blown off instantly. Following this, a secondary explosion occurs within the hull, which is engulfed in flames as the remaining ammunition detonates. This Russian infantry fighting vehicle, fully fueled and loaded with ammunition, drives along the tree line. Suddenly, it turns around and begins to move in the opposite direction. This was a fatal mistake, as a kamikaze drone chasing the vehicle collided with it head-on. By the way, give it a like while these guys fighting for independence direct the drone towards another piece of Russian equipment that needs to be finished off. The first strike causes a small fire. But look, moments later, the vehicle is engulfed in flames. A detonation occurs, and a second one just a second later. All that remains of this tank is worthless scrap metal. A drone approaches the abandoned tank. At first glance, the hit seems to be a miss, but a fire ignites, which will eventually burn the vehicle to the ground. Russian soldiers abandoned these 2 light infantry fighting vehicles, but left a significant amount of ammunition inside. Ukrainian forces cannot seize everything inside the vehicles due to the dangerously close proximity to the enemy. Drones are dispatched to carry out the task. The first drone strikes the IFV on the right. A fire ignites. The second drone hits the fuel tank suspended behind the vehicle. The explosion was incredibly powerful. Look at the large chunk of the hull that flew off the vehicle. This tank has been abandoned with the hatch left open. The operator directs the drone there without hesitation. The vehicle is on fire, and the ammunition inside detonates, completely destroying it. The drone strikes the IFV moving within the convoy. The vehicle sustains no significant damage but begins to catch fire. The crew evacuates it. The rest of the group manages to advance a bit further, but starts triggering anti-tank mines, clustering at one point. All the vehicles were reinforced with additional armor, but it did not protect them from the mines. Drones have begun to completely destroy the remnants of the equipment. Look, this is all that remains of the assault attempt. One IFV is still burning, and nearby, you can see a tank from which the turret was blown off after the detonation. This massive Russian attack completely failed. Ukrainian forces coordinated different types of weapons exceptionally well, giving us a spectacular display of explosions. To stop this attack, all available resources were deployed, including even cluster munitions. What followed was absolute hell for the Russian vehicles. Look, yet another tank with its turret trying to launch into space. One after another, the vehicles, fully loaded with ammunition, are exploding with immense force. Drones began to finish off the equipment, which was exploding just as spectacularly. Look, the Russians fled, leaving these two IFVs completely exposed. This made it easier for the kamikaze drones, which quickly and accurately destroyed the vehicles. They burned for a while until only charred metal was left. The drone flies in to treat another ailment, the open hatch of the tank. The pill in the form of a shaped charge shell didn't help. Pressure built up inside the vehicle, and it eventually burned completely. The drone didn't aim for the open hatch, but that didn't stop it from inflicting fatal damage on this IFV. The tank with additional armor met the same fate. In this case, the turtle tank and the IFV were trying to reach Ukrainian positions. Most likely, they were stopped by anti-tank mines, and kamikaze drones were sent to finish the job. There was no spectacular detonation, but like the other vehicles, this one is beyond repair or recovery. Just like this turtle tank, which will slowly but surely burn out and remain forever in the Ukrainian fields.